Imagine it is like 2 o'clock in the afternoon in mid-July. Your air conditioning is fighting a losing battle against this record-breaking heat wave, and your house is just sweltering.
Oh yeah, we all know that feeling.
Right. So you walk over to your aquarium, and the little glass thermometer suction to the side is pinned in the red. I mean, it's sitting a full 6 degrees higher than normal.
Which is terrifying for a fish
It
keeper.
really is. You look at your fish, and they're acting strangely hovering right at the surface. You know, their gills pumping frantically like they're gasping for air. And your immediate, entirely human instinct is to just panic.
Yes, to do something drastic.
Exactly. You want to run to the kitchen, grab a bag of loose ice from the freezer, and just dump it straight into the tank to fix the problem right now. But don't do that. You might just kill them faster. Welcome to the Tank Guide Life podcast, a product of Fish Keeping Life Co.
Glad to be here.
Today's deep dive is really about stepping back from that ledge of panic. We're doing a comprehensive, practical exploration of our research on how to actually protect your aquariums during extreme heat, summer storms, and those inevitable power outages that follow.
Yeah, that instinct to panic is incredibly common. And, well, it usually stems from a fundamental misunderstanding of what is actually happening in the water.
Right, we look at the thermometer and think that's the whole story.
Exactly. We are taking an entirely ecosystem-focused approach today because when that temperature spikes, it is so easy to get tunnel vision and only focus on the heat itself.
So what's a better way to approach it?
Well, our core message for you today, the blueprint we want to firmly establish and keep returning to, comes down to 5 distinct steps. Monitor the tank, protect oxygenation, test the water, make gradual changes, prepare before the outage.
I love that. Monitor the tank, protect oxygenation, test the water, make gradual changes, prepare before the outage. It's a great blueprint because, I mean, it shifts you from being reactive to being proactive. Just because that climbing red line on your thermometer is truly only half the story. And arguably, it's the less dangerous half.
It really is.
The real danger during a summer heat wave is completely invisible to the naked eye. So let's step away from the thermometer for a moment and look at what is fundamentally shifting in the physics of the water column. We need to talk about the thermal oxygen squeeze.
The thermal oxygen squeeze, yes. It is arguably the most critical scientific concept any aquarium keeper needs to understand during the summer months.
So how does it actually work?
To grasp it, we have to look at the situation as a problem of supply and demand. And the cruel reality of a heat wave is that it negatively impacts both sides of that equation simultaneously.
Oh, wow. So it hits them from both ends.
Right. Let's start with the supply side, which really comes down to the literal kinetic energy of water molecules.
Okay, because water isn't just, a static background. It's a chemical environment that physically changes as it absorbs thermal energy.
Exactly. In cooler water, the H2O molecules are relatively sluggish. Because they aren't moving frantically, it is very easy for dissolved gases, specifically oxygen, to remain trapped in the spaces between those water molecules.
That makes sense. They're just kind of resting there.
Yeah, but as the water temperature rises, it absorbs heat energy. That heat translates into kinetic energy, so the water molecules start vibrating and moving much faster.
Like they're agitated.
Right, and as they bounce around with all this newly acquired energy, they physically break the weak intermolecular bonds that are holding on to the dissolved oxygen gas.
So it's essentially shaking the oxygen loose.
That is a very accurate way to visualize it. The excited water molecules shake the oxygen loose, and that oxygen gas literally bubbles out of solution and escapes into the atmosphere.
Wow.
The physical capacity of the water to hold dissolved oxygen just drops. It is a strict law of physics and solubility. Warm water simply cannot hold as much oxygen as cold water.
So your supply is actively leaving the tank right when it gets hot. Okay, so the ceiling for oxygen capacity is lowering. That's the supply side. But then we have the fish themselves, which brings us to the demand side.
Yeah, and this is where biological reality collides with chemical physics. Most of the fish we keep in our aquariums are ectotherms. They're cold-blooded.
Right, they don't sweat or shiver like we do.
Exactly. They do not have an internal mechanism to regulate their body temperature like mammals do. Their internal temperature is entirely dictated by the environment they are swimming in. So as the thermal energy in the water increases, the thermal energy inside the fish's body increases.
Their biological engines basically start running hotter and faster.
And an engine running faster requires more fuel and more oxygen. Their metabolic rate increases. Every bodily process, digestion, circulation, cellular respiration, it all speeds up.
So they need more air.
Yes. To sustain that increased metabolic rate, their tissues demand significantly more oxygen from the blood, which means their gills have to pull significantly more oxygen out of the water. So you have a situation where the physical supply of oxygen in the environment is rapidly dropping, while the biological need for oxygen is simultaneously climbing.
They're caught in a thermal oxygen squeeze.
Exactly.
You know, it's funny. When I first heard about this, I tried to picture what it would feel like for a person. I used to think of it like running a marathon on a humid day and trying to breathe through a tiny straw.
That's a good analogy.
But really, I mean, almost more insidious than that. Because if you are standing in a hot room, your body sweats to cool down, but you still have the same amount of oxygen in the room's air. For a fish, the very medium they rely on for life is chemically betraying them. It's losing its life-giving properties, precisely when they're asking the system for more.
It is a profound environmental stressor. To ground this in actual data, we looked deeply into the dissolved oxygen tables provided by the United States Geological Survey.
Oh yeah, the USGS data.
Yeah, and the numbers clearly illustrate why this squeeze is so dangerous. Let's take a standard, comfortable tropical aquarium sitting at 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is roughly 24 degrees Celsius.
Pretty standard temperature.
Right. At that temperature, assuming 100% saturation, the water physically holds about 8.42 milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen.
Okay, so 8.42 milligrams per liter. That's our baseline for a healthy, comfortable tank.
Now, a summer heat wave hits. The ambient temperature in your living room spikes, and your aquarium water temperature climbs to an elevated 86 degrees Fahrenheit, or 30 degrees Celsius.
Getting pretty hot.
Because of that kinetic energy, we discussed the physical capacity of that water to hold oxygen drops to roughly 7.56 milligrams per liter.
Wait, from 8.42 down to 7.56? I mean, that is nearly a 10% drop in the maximum possible breathable air in the tank just from an 11-degree temperature swing.
Yes. And the crucial context here is that the USGS numbers assume 100% saturation, which almost no home aquarium operates at.
Right, because of all the biological activity.
Exactly. Between the oxygen consumed by the fish, the plants at night, and the massive biological demand of the bacteria in your filter, your tank is likely already operating well below maximum capacity.
Oh, so it's already tight.
Yeah, taking a 10% chunk out of an already diminished supply pushes the ecosystem dangerously close to a hypoxic state.
Now, I have spent a lot of time on various fish-keeping forums over the years, and you always see these sort of rules of thumb thrown around during the summer.
Oh, the forum myths.
Yeah, exactly. One I see constantly is someone saying, if your tank temperature jumps 10 degrees, your fish's metabolism automatically doubles. Like it's stated as an absolute mathematical fact. Does our research support that kind of universal claim?
It absolutely does not, and we have to be very careful to caution against universal myths like that. It is true that higher temperatures increase metabolic demand, but claiming it universally doubles over a specific temperature gradient is a dangerous oversimplification of biology.
Right, because it treats a neon tetra and an Oscar like they are the exact same machine.
Exactly. The metabolic response to heat varies wildly. It depends on the specific species, their overall body mass, their age, their current activity level, and crucially, their evolutionary thermal range.
Like where they come from in the wild.
Right. If you take a discus fish, which originates from the slow-moving, intensely warm waters of the Amazon basin, an 86-degree tank is well within their evolutionary comfort zone. Their metabolic response will be moderate.
They're used to it.
But if you expose a white cloud mountain minnow, which evolved in the cool, fast-flowing mountain streams of China, to that exact same 86-degree water, their metabolic system will be thrown into complete overdrive. They will experience profound physiological stress.
Okay, so the takeaway isn't to try and calculate a strict mathematical formula about exactly how fast their metabolism is running.
No, definitely not.
The takeaway is just understanding the mechanism, regardless of the species, during a heat wave. The demand for oxygen goes up while the supply goes down.
Precisely. That is the foundational mechanism we have to keep in mind.
So if that is the invisible physics happening in the water column, how does this actually manifest visually? Like if a listener is sitting on their couch right now looking across the room at their tank, how do they read their fish to know that the squeeze is happening?
Well, fish are incredibly communicative animals, but they communicate entirely through behavior and subtle physical cues.
You just have to know what to look for.
Right. The warning signs of low dissolved oxygen are specific, but they can be missed if you aren't actively observing. The first and most obvious sign is rapid labored gill movement.
Like they're breathing heavy.
Yes. The operculum, which is the bony flap covering the gills, will be pumping frantically. It looks exactly like a dog panting heavily after a long run. They are trying to force as much water over their gill filaments as possible to extract whatever trace amounts of oxygen are left.
And if that isn't enough, they move to the surface, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've seen that in my own tanks in the past. They just hang out right at the top of their mouths, physically breaking the water line, almost gulping at the air.
That behavior is called surface gasping or piping. And they aren't necessarily trying to breathe. The atmospheric air, most fish physically cannot process gaseous oxygen.
So what are they doing up there?
What they're doing is seeking out the boundary layer. They are looking for the microscopic fraction of a millimeter thin layer of water sitting directly at the air-water interface. Because that surface layer is in direct contact with the atmosphere, it is the most oxygen-rich water in the entire aquarium.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when the lower levels of the tank become hypoxic, survival instinct drives them to that boundary layer.
That makes total sense. They are just trying to find the one spot in the house where the AC is still working, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
What other signs should we look for?
You might observe unusual lethargy. A species that normally darts around the middle of the water column might just sink to the substrate and sit motionless.
Just laying on the bottom.
Right. They are intuitively trying to conserve energy and lower their metabolic demand. You will also likely see a sudden loss of appetite. And very commonly, you will see fish clustering in specific high-flow areas.
Like crowding around a filter.
Exactly. They will gather directly around the output of a filter, hover near a power head or spool directly above an active air stone.
Because they figure out that moving water brings oxygen. It really highlights how intelligent they actually are. But this raises a scenario that I think trips up almost everyone, myself included. Let's say it's 95 degrees outside. My living room is incredibly hot. I walk over to the tank, the thermometer says 88 degrees, and I see my fish lethargic and gasping at the surface.
Okay.
My immediate thought is, well, the water's too hot, so the fish are gasping, cause and effect. If I see my fish gasping at the surface during a heat wave, isn't it completely safe to just assume it's just the heat?
It is the single most common pitfall in summer aquarium husbandry, and it is an assumption we have to deconstruct completely.
Really?
No, it is absolutely not safe to assume it's just the heat. The reality of aquatic biology is that these behavioral signs, the rapid gill pumping the surface, gasping, the lethargy, the clustering, they are not heat-specific diagnoses. They are generalized indicators of systemic respiratory distress.
Which means something else could be suffocating them.
Exactly. If your biological filter crashes and you experience an ammonia spike, that ammonia literally burns the gill filaments. It thickens the tissue and prevents oxygen from passing into the bloodstream. The fish will gasp at the surface, showing the exact same symptoms as a heat wave.
Wow, so it looks identical.
Completely.
Yeah.
And if you have a nitrate spike, the nitrate binds to their hemoglobin, turning it into methemoglobin, which physically cannot carry oxygen to their organs. They call it brown blood disease. The fish will gasp at the surface, or if a household toxin like an aerosol spray gets into the water, they will gasp at the surface.
That is a massive paradigm shift. The symptoms for the water is physically too hot and the water is chemically toxic look entirely overlapping to the naked eye, which completely validates the third step of our core message. Test the water.
It is entirely why that step exists. A heat emergency is a system problem, not just a thermometer problem.
System problem.
If you just look at the thermometer and assume the heat is the only issue, you might try to cool the tank down while leaving your fish to suffer through severe ammonia toxicity. When you see those behavioral warning signs, you absolutely check the temperature, but you must immediately pull out your liquid test kit.
Right away.
You need to check your ammonia, your nitrite, and your nitrate levels. You have to verify the chemical integrity of the ecosystem before you start making drastic environmental changes.
Okay, so let's play this out. We've done the tests, we shook the little chemical bottles, waited the 5 minutes, and the parameters are pristine. 0 ammonia, 0 nitrate. But the tank is sitting at 86 degrees, and the fish are showing signs of the thermal oxygen squeeze. Our immediate priority isn't actually lowering the temperature, is it? It is restoring the oxygen supply. We have to treat the symptom before we cure the disease.
That is the correct triage protocol. Before we worry about extracting thermal energy, we have to secure biological life support. We have to maximize gas exchange.
And how do we do that?
Well, to do that effectively, we need to talk about fluid dynamics and how gas exchange actually functions in an enclosed aquatic environment. Atmospheric oxygen doesn't just magically permeate the entire water column.
That doesn't just sink in.
No, it enters the water primarily through diffusion and physical turbulence, right at the boundary layer, the air-water interface.
We talked about this in our research phase, and the analogy that stuck with me is that the surface of the water is essentially the lung of the aquarium.
It is the perfect analogy. The surface is the lung. The greater the surface area and the more that surface is broken and churned, the more efficient the lung becomes at exchanging stale carbon dioxide for fresh oxygen.
Okay, so our primary goal during a heat wave is to increase the efficiency of that lung using practical tools for surface agitation. We were looking at air stones, air pumps, hang-on back filter returns, upward-pointed filter nozzles, and spray bars.
Yes, all of those are excellent tools.
Okay, I have to stop you here and talk about air stones because I think there's a massive misconception in the hobby that needs to be addressed. I know I was guilty of this.
Oh, I think I know where you're going with this.
When I first set up a tank years ago, I bought a heavy-duty air pump and this massive porous air stone. I buried it in the gravel, plugged it in, and watched this thick curtain of bubbles rise to the top. And I genuinely thought, look at all that pure oxygen I am ejecting straight into the water. Like I thought the oxygen was dissolving out of the bubbles and into the water as they floated up.
It is an incredibly intuitive assumption to make. You see air going into the water, so you assume the water is absorbing the air. But from a fluid dynamics perspective, that is not what is happening at all.
Wait, really? So what are they doing?
The bubbles generated by a standard aquarium air stone are relatively large, and they rise to the surface far too quickly for any meaningful gas diffusion to occur through the bubble wall. The contact time is just too short.
Okay, so if they aren't injecting oxygen on the way up, what is the point of them?
They are engines of displacement. They function almost exactly like the physics of a convection oven. As that column of bubbles rushes violently toward the surface, it creates a localized, low-pressure zone in its wake.
Like a draft.
Yes. That upward current physically drags the heavy, stagnant, oxygen-depleted water from the very bottom of the aquarium up to the top. And when those bubbles hit the surface and pop, they violently break the surface tension. They create ripple, splash, and turbulence.
So the bubbles are just the delivery mechanism.
Yeah.
They're grabbing the stale water from the bottom, throwing it up against the lung of the surface, and smashing the surface tension so the atmosphere can rush in.
Precisely. That physical agitation, the constant renewal and turnover of water at the air-water interface, is what facilitates the actual transfer of atmospheric oxygen into the tank. The air stone itself isn't providing the oxygen the turbulent surface is.
That changes how you view all your equipment, because it means you don't necessarily need to run out and buy an air stone if you understand the physics. If the goal is just surface agitation and turnover, you can use the gear you already have. For instance, if you run a standard hang-on back filter, you can just slightly lower the water level in your aquarium. By dropping the water line an inch or two, the filtered water returning to the tank has to fall further. It creates a miniature waterfall.
Which is incredibly effective.
Right. That water crashes into the surface with more kinetic energy driving deeper into the water column and churning the surface far more aggressively.
It is a brilliant zero-cost adjustment that instantly increases gas exchange. And if listeners want to evaluate their own tanks right now, there is a very simple visual check.
Oh, what's that?
Bend down so your eye level is completely flush with the top rim of the tank and look horizontally across the water line. If the surface of the water looks like a perfectly flat sheet of glass or a still mirror, your gas exchange is severely compromised.
Right, it's totally sealed off.
You want to look across that surface and see continuous, active, rippling churning and physical turnover.
If it looks like glass, your tank is holding its breath. But let's add some nuance here, because more isn't always better. If I see my tank is hot, and I decide to just point 3 massive power heads at the surface to create a rolling boil, I might solve the oxygen problem, but I'm going to create a whole new disaster, right?
You absolutely will. More surface movement is the goal, but you cannot turn your aquarium into a washing machine. You have to respect the biological reality of the livestock. You must match the flow rate to the specific species' physical tolerance.
Right, you can't just blast them.
Exactly. If you have hill stream loaches, which evolved in torrential rapids, they will thrive in that chaotic flow. But if you have a betta fish, which has long-flowing, delicate fins and naturally evolved to live in completely stagnant, shallow water, blasting them with a high-powered current is going to cause immense physical exhaustion.
If you force a betta to swim on a treadmill, just to keep from being slammed into the glass. They're going to burn through whatever limited oxygen they have, which entirely defeats the purpose of trying to help them.
Exactly. You want to agitate the surface layer to break the tension, but you must ensure the overall current in the middle and lower water column remains manageable for the fish.
Okay, so we've diagnosed the squeeze, we've tested the water to rule out chemical toxins, and we've optimized our surface agitation to get the lung breathing efficiently. The biological life support is stable.
Step 1 complete.
Right. Now we finally have to address the root cause. We have to extract the excess thermal energy from the water. We need to cool the tank down, but we have to do it in a way that doesn't trigger systemic shock. What does the research say are our best, safest strategies?
You must always prioritize safe physical cooling methods that work gradually. You want to look at reducing the environmental heat inputs first.
Like what's adding heat to the tank?
Yes, that means temporarily reducing your lighting periods or shutting the tank lights off entirely as they radiate significant thermal energy. You should physically block any direct room sunlight from hitting the tank glass. And fundamentally, you must physically check your submersible heater to ensure the internal thermostat hasn't malfunctioned and locked into the on position.
Oh man, a stuck heater in summer is a nightmare.
It is a surprisingly common cause of summer tank crashes. So once the inputs are minimized, we rely heavily on evaporative cooling.
Let's really dig into evaporative cooling, because I know people are often highly skeptical of this. The idea that you can take a cheap $5 oscillating desk fan, point it at a massive 50-gallon box of water, and actually drop the temperature seems counterintuitive. How does the physics of that actually work?
It works through the thermodynamic principle of the latent heat of vaporization, and it is incredibly effective. When you direct a continuous airflow across the exposed surface of the water, you are aggressively accelerating the rate of evaporation. For a water molecule to change its physical state from a liquid into a gas-water vapor, it requires a significant amount of energy to break free. It absorbs that necessary thermal energy directly out of the surrounding liquid water, and then carries that heat energy away into the atmosphere as it evaporates.
Okay, I want to make sure I grasp this. It's essentially the exact same mechanism as human sweating. When it's 100 degrees outside, our bodies secrete liquid water onto our skin. The ambient air evaporates that sweat, and as the moisture transitions into a vapor, it physically pulls the body heat out of our skin, cooling our internal temperature down.
That is the exact mechanism. You are essentially making the aquarium sweat. And depending on the ambient humidity of the room, a simple fan blowing across the surface can easily drop the water temperature by 4 to 6 degrees Fahrenheit.
That is substantial.
Yeah.
But there is a massive, often overlooked catch when you force an aquarium to sweat right. Because unlike humans who can just drink a glass of water, the tank is a closed chemical system.
Yes, and this is a critical distinction that keepers must understand. When aquarium water evaporates, only the pure H2O molecules leave the tank.
Nothing else.
Nothing else.
Right.
Everything else, the dissolved minerals, the calcium, the nitrates, the liquid fertilizers, the biological waste, it is all left behind. So as the water volume shrinks due to the fan, the concentration of all those remaining elements goes up. The water becomes harder and the waste becomes more concentrated.
Which means we have to talk about the difference between a top-off and a water change.
Precisely. When you run a fan during a heat wave, your daily evaporation rate is going to skyrocket. You might lose an inch of water a day. You will need to frequently add pure dechlorinated water just to replace what was lost and keep your filter intake submerged. That is a top-off.
Okay, just refilling the lost liquid.
Yes, it dilutes the concentrated minerals back to their original state. But a top-off does not remove any of the accumulated waste. You must still maintain your regular schedule of physical water changes where you manually siphon out the dirty water to remove those nitrates from the ecosystem.
Right. Sweating the tank works beautifully, but you have to manage the chemical aftermath. Now, what about active cooling? Let's say a listener lives in an area with 90% humidity. So evaporative cooling is barely working, and the tank is still hovering at 88 degrees. We need to pull the temperature down more aggressively. I see the frozen water bottle trick recommended everywhere.
Using a frozen water bottle is a valid manual emergency method, provided it is executed carefully. The operative words are clean and sealed.
Clean and sealed.
You take a standard plastic water bottle, fill it freeze, its solid bile, ensure the outside is entirely free of any sticky labels or glue residue, and float it securely sealed in the tank. The ice acts as a thermal heat sink, slowly absorbing energy from the surrounding warm water. You can also perform small partial water changes, perhaps 10 or 15%, using properly conditioned replacement water that is a few degrees cooler than the tank water.
But this is where the instinct to panic that we talked about in the very beginning can cause absolute devastation. People get impatient.
They do, and it leads to catastrophic mistakes. The absolute most crucial rule of active cooling, and this is a principle we cannot overstate. You never, ever dump loose ice cubes or freezing cold water directly into the aquarium. We are steering the temperature down. We are not trying to shock the tank cold.
We are steering the temperature down. We are not trying to shock the tank cold. If you dump a bag of ice into a tank, you are creating massive, localized freezing zones.
Yes, a rapid, precipitous drop in temperature is infinitely more dangerous than a slow, gradual rise. Fish physiology relies on delicate osmotic regulation and enzyme function.
Their bodies just can't handle the swing.
Exactly. If you drop the ambient temperature by 5 degrees in 10 minutes, their nervous systems will go into shock. Their immune systems will crash. If you use a frozen water bottle, you must view it as an active, hands-on process. You do not just drop a block of ice in the tank and go to bed.
You have to watch it.
You monitor the thermometer, constantly removing the bottle if the temperature drops too quickly. This is especially true for smaller setups. I mean, a frozen bottle will crash the temperature in a 10-gallon tank drastically faster than it will in a 75-gallon tank.
Steering the ship, not dropping an anchor. That makes total sense. Now, as we are managing all of these moving parts, optimizing the lung, running the fans, steering the temperature down, our research uncovered a chemistry twist that is happening entirely in the background.
Ah, yes, the chemistry twist.
Honestly, this was the piece of data that completely shifted my understanding of aquarium keeping. Because it brings us full circle to why you were so adamant earlier that we must test the water. Heat doesn't just lower oxygen. Heat physically niculates the chemical toxicity of the waste in the water.
It does, and it is a fascinating, terrifying piece of aquatic chemistry. To understand it, we need to examine the nature of total ammonia in a freshwater ecosystem.
Okay, break that down for us.
When a fish produces waste, or when organic matter decays, it produces total ammonia. But in the water, that total ammonia splits into two distinct chemical forms. The first is ammonium, which is chemically written as NH4 plus Se. The second is unionized ammonia, which is NH3.
Okay, ammonium is NH4 plus and unionized ammonia is NH3.
Correct, and the biological distinction between the two is staggering. Ammonium, the NH4 plus, is relatively non-toxic to fish at typical aquarium levels. It is ionized, meaning it carries a charge which makes it very difficult for it to pass through the delicate tissues of the fish's gills. It essentially bounces off.
So NH4 plus is the safe one.
Yes, but unionized ammonia, the NH3, is highly toxic. It lacks that charge. It passes effortlessly through the gill membranes, enters the bloodstream, burns the tissues, and prevents the blood from releasing carbon dioxide.
So NH3 is the absolute killer in the aquarium. Now here's where the heat wave becomes a chemical nightmare. A hot day doesn't magically spawn more waste. It doesn't create ammonia out of thin air. However, the exact ratio, the balance between the safe NH4 plus and lethal NH3 is not fixed.
No, it is not.
It is dictated entirely by two environmental variables, the pH of your water and the temperature of your water.
Let's look at the thermodynamics of that chemical equilibrium. When you add heat to the water, you are adding thermal energy. That energy is enough to physically break the hydrogen bond in the safe ammonium molecule. It knocks one of those hydrogen ions off, violently converting the safe NH4 plus directly into the highly toxic NH3.
The data we found from the EPA's 2013 freshwater ammonia criteria paints a really stark picture of how fast this conversion happens. Let's look at a concrete example. Say you have an aquarium with a moderately hard pH of 8.0.
Very common.
Right. At our standard comfortable temperature of 75 degrees Fahrenheit, the fraction of your total ammonia that is currently in that highly toxic NH3 form is about 5.03%.
Which, depending on the total concentration a healthy fish might be able to tolerate temporarily.
Right. But if that exact same tank, with the exact same total amount of ammonia sitting in the water, heats up during a summer afternoon to 86 degrees Fahrenheit, well, that thermal energy shifts the balance. The toxic NH3 fraction jumps from 5.03% up to 7.46%.
Precisely. Without you adding a single drop of new waste, the rising temperature and pH have shifted a greater fraction of the existing ammonia over into the highly toxic form. The water has inherently become more lethal.
This was a massive realization for me. Because years ago, I had a beautiful community tank. It was late August. The parameters were perfect the month before, but my AC broke and the tank spiked to 88 degrees. Within a day, half the tank died.
Yeah.
Couldn't figure it out. I thought, well, the heat just killed them.
Many people think that.
But what actually happened was the heat weaponized a dormant problem. Let's walk through that scenario for the listener. Say it's winter. Your tank sits at a cool 72 degrees. Maybe you have a slight trace of ammonia because your biological cycle bumped or you missed a water change because the water is cold. Almost all of that ammonia is locked safely in the non-toxic NH4+ form. The fish look completely healthy.
But it is a ticking time bomb.
Exactly. Because then July rolls around, the heat wave hits, the tank temperature surges to 86 degrees. You haven't added any new fish, you haven't fed them any extra food. But purely because of that chemical equilibrium shift, that trace ammonia that was completely harmless yesterday is suddenly converted into lethal NH3 today. The fish start gasping.
And if you don't understand this underlying chemistry, you look at the gasping fish, you look at the thermometer, and you fall for the exact trap we discussed earlier.
You blame the heat.
You say, it's just the thermal oxygen squeeze, so you float a frozen water bottle and turn on a fan. Meanwhile, your fish are actively suffering from acute chemical gill burns. This mechanism is precisely why a tank that was seemingly fine with neglected water quality in the winter will violently crash during a summer heat wave. And it is exactly why testing your water is absolutely non-negotiable.
The heat literally weaponizes the existing waste, which perfectly segues into the next vital component of managing this ecosystem, controlling how much waste we are introducing in the first place.
Yes, source control.
Right. If we know that the water has a severely reduced oxygen capacity, and we know that any existing waste is becoming exponentially more toxic, we have to strictly regulate the biological load. We need to talk about feeding your fish during a heat wave.
We have to look closely at the metabolic cost of digestion. Digestion is not a passive activity. It is a highly active, incredibly energy-intensive biological function. When a fish consumes a meal, its body must divert massive amounts of blood flow and resources to the gastrointestinal tract to break down those proteins and fats.
It's the aquatic version of the meat sweats. You eat a massive steak dinner, and your heart rate elevates. You feel hot. You feel sluggish. Your body is working overtime, demanding more oxygen to process the heavy meal.
That is exactly the biological process occurring in your fish. But remember, the context of the heat wave, the oxygen supply in the water is already critically low, and the fish's baseline metabolism is already running hot.
Right, they're already struggling.
If you feed them a heavy meal under those conditions, you are forcing their digestive system to demand a massive spike in oxygen from an environment that simply cannot provide it. You are severely exacerbating the thermal oxygen squeeze.
Not to mention the secondary effect on the water chemistry.
Precisely. More food going into the fish means more biological waste coming out of the fish, adding to that ammonia load we just discussed. Furthermore, any uneaten food that falls into the substrate will decay significantly faster in warm water.
Oh, right, because bacteria thrive in the heat.
Yes. That rapid decay triggers sudden blooms of heterotrophic bacteria. Those bacteria are aggressive consumers of oxygen. As they multiply to break down the rotting food, they will literally strip the remaining oxygen out of the water column, suffocating your fish in the process.
It creates a terrifying feedback loop. But I see this mistake constantly, especially with newer keepers. Human beings are hardwired to nurture. When we look at a pet, whether it's a dog or a fish, and they look lethargic or stressed, our immediate instinct is to offer them comfort.
And we use food for comfort.
Right? The easiest way we know how to provide comfort is through food.
Yeah.
Think, oh, he looks miserable in this heat. I'll give him a treat to make him feel a bit better. We have to actively fight that instinct. A heat wave is not the time to panic feed.
A heat wave is not the time to panic feed. If your tank is experiencing extreme temperatures, you need to implement a strictly lighter feeding schedule. Feed them a fraction of what you normally would, perhaps only every other day.
Just barely anything.
And it is absolutely paramount that you use a net to immediately remove any uneaten food after a few minutes. You must proactively manage the biological load on the system.
Okay, so we've covered the physics of oxygen, the thermodynamics of cooling, the chemistry of ammonia, and the biological load of feeding. We have a solid grip on managing a hot ecosystem.
Yes, the tank is stable for now.
But we have to face the reality of summer weather. Summer heat doesn't just bake the house. It puts immense strain on the regional electrical grid. It brings massive, violent afternoon thunderstorms. What happens to our fragile, oxygen-deprived hot ecosystem when the lights suddenly flicker and go out?
A power outage during a heat wave is the ultimate crucible for an aquarium keeper. It is the immediate simultaneous loss of all your artificial life support systems.
Everything just stops.
The exact second the grid goes down, you lose your mechanical filtration, you lose your water circulation, and most critically, you lose your surface agitation. The lung of the aquarium flatlines.
The clock starts ticking instantly.
It does. And surviving a blackout requires you to operate under a very strict hierarchy of needs. When the power drops, a surprising number of people immediately panic about their expensive LED aquarium lights going off, particularly if they have heavily planted aquascape.
Now I think the plants are going to die.
They worry the plants will die. But lights are not the priority during a blackout. Life support equipment is.
Lights are not the priority during a blackout. Life support equipment is. That is the golden rule. Your Amazon swords and Anubias plants will easily survive a few days in the dark. But your fish, and more importantly, your beneficial bacteria, will not survive without oxygen.
That is a crucial point that is often missed. The nitrifying bacteria living in the ceramic media of your filter, the nitrosomonas and nitrobacter that consume the deadly ammonia, they are strictly aerobic organisms.
They need air to live just like the fish.
They require a constant supply of oxygenated water flowing over them to survive. If the power goes out and the water inside a canister filter becomes stagnant, those millions of beneficial bacteria will rapidly consume whatever oxygen is left in the canister, and then they will suffocate and die en masse.
Which means even if the power comes back on the next day and the temperature is fine, your biological filter is dead and your tank will suffer a massive lethal ammonia spike.
Exactly. The collapse of the ecosystem happens on a microscopic level first. So we must prioritize blackout preparedness to maintain that life support.
Let's build out the gear strategy. What is the absolute first line of defense every single keeper should own?
The most fundamental, accessible, and vital piece of backup equipment is a battery-operated air pump. They're relatively inexpensive. They usually run on standard D-cell batteries, and they can keep a steady, vigorous stream of bubbles moving water from the bottom to the surface.
So it keeps the lung working.
It maintains that convective flow we discussed earlier, ensuring the surface lung keeps exchanging gases. But it is entirely useless if you do not have fresh, unopened batteries stored right next to it.
Right. There is no worse feeling than scrambling in the dark, pulling an emergency pump out of the closet, and finding crusty, corroded batteries from 3 years ago stuck inside.
Oh, that's the worst.
Now, what if a listener has a massive 125-gallon setup or a fish room with multiple tanks? A single battery pump isn't going to cut it.
In that scenario, you need to scale up your electrical preparedness. You should look into purchasing a UPS, an uninterruptible power supply similar to the heavy battery backups used for office computer servers. Or, for extended outages, you can invest in larger lithium-ion portable power stations.
But you can't plug everything into those, right?
Oh, the critical strategy here is load management.
Yeah.
If you plug your massive LED lights and your 300-watt heater into a UPS, it will drain the battery in 20 minutes. You must only plug in the critical life support loads, the filter pump to keep the bacteria alive, or a low-wattage air pump to keep the surface churning.
Okay, I want to pivot to a worst-case scenario because we have to be realistic. We've just listed a bunch of great, highly recommended gear. But let's say a listener is brand new to the hobby. It's their very first summer with a tank. An unexpected microburst hits their neighborhood. The tank, the power grid fails, and they are standing in their living room realizing they have absolutely zero backup gear.
No battery pumps?
Nothing. No UPS, no battery air pump, no generator, just a hot, dark room and a tank full of fish. What is the zero-gear emergency protocol? How do we save the tank?
If you are caught completely without mechanical gear, you have to become the mechanical aeration yourself. You have to physically replace the filter. We rely on a manual intervention known as the temporary scoop and pour method.
The scoop and pour.
Yeah.
Let's walk the listener through exactly how to execute this safely and effectively.
You need to locate a small bucket or a plastic pitcher, and this detail is absolutely critical. It must be completely soap-free and ideally dedicated exclusively to aquarium use.
Don't just grab something in the dishwasher.
Do not grab a random plastic cup from the kitchen dishwasher that might have invisible chemical detergent residue baked onto it. Even a trace amount of soap will bind to the fish's gills and suffocate them. You take that clean pitcher, gently scoop water directly out of the aquarium, raise it a short distance, perhaps 6 to 12 inches above the surface, and pour it aggressively back in.
You are basically manually mimicking the waterfall effect of a hang-on-back filter.
The physics are identical.
Yeah.
You are relying on gravity and kinetic energy to create manual turbulence. The physical force of that water pouring back in violently breaks the cohesive forces of the surface tension. It drives oxygen-rich surface water deep into the water column, creates an upward draft pulling stale water from the bottom, and forces gas exchange.
It's quite literally performing CPR on the aquarium.
It is a highly active, incredibly hands-on intervention.
But here is the question that always comes up when you tell someone to do this. If I'm doing CPR on my tank, what is the dosage? Is there a schedule I should follow? Like, do I set a timer on my phone and pour a pitcher of water for 5 minutes every single hour on the hour?
That is the most difficult aspect of this method. There is no universal schedule. It is impossible to prescribe a set timeline because every single tank's biological oxygen demand is entirely unique.
It varies that much.
Wildly! If you have a heavily stocked 55-gallon tank full of large active cichlids in 85-degree water, the biological demand is astronomical. You might need to be scooping and pouring almost constantly to keep them from suffocating. Conversely, if you have a heavily planted 10-gallon tank with a single tiny bed of fish, the oxygen depletion will be incredibly slow. They might be perfectly fine without intervention for several hours.
So the timer is out. What do we do?
You cannot rely on a timer. You have to monitor the tank. You watch the fish. You look for the behavioral warning signs we discussed earlier, the rapid gill movement, the lethargy, the surface gasping. The moment you see them exhibiting those signs, you grab the pitcher and you scoop and pour until their respiration returns to normal.
Man, just thinking about doing that is exhausting. Imagine the power is out for 2 whole days after a hurricane. Standing there in the sweltering heat, scooping water in the dark.
It is physically and mentally exhausting, which highlights precisely why the scoop and pour is strictly a temporary emergency stopgap. It is not equivalent to continuous automated mechanical aeration. It is the method of absolute last resort, and it serves as the most compelling argument for why proactive preparation is so utterly vital.
Absolutely. No one wants to be awake at 3 a.m., exhausted, sweating, scooping water by candlelight. So let's talk about how to prepare so our listeners never find themselves in that situation. Let's turn that reactive, sweaty panic into proactive peace of mind. Let's build the ultimate aquarium storm kit.
An aquarium storm kit should be assembled and treated with the exact same seriousness as your household hurricane or earthquake kit. It should be stored in a dedicated, easily accessible location.
What goes in it first?
It absolutely must include the battery-operated air pump we discussed, complete with an air stone and airline tubing. Stored right next to it in a waterproof bag should be fresh, unopened batteries. You also need a reliable analog glass thermometer. If your digital thermometer relies on a wall outlet, it is useless in a blackout.
Good point.
You need a master liquid test kit because without your filter running, you must manually monitor for ammonia spikes.
What else goes into the kit?
A fresh bottle of water conditioner, specifically one that neutralizes both chlorine and chloramines in case you need to perform emergency manual water changes. You should include that dedicated, clean, soap-free pitcher specifically reserved for the scoop and pour method, serving as a fail-safe if the battery pump malfunctions.
Right, a backup for the backup.
You need dedicated, clean aquarium buckets with tight-fitting lids. And finally, you should have physical written notes detailing your specific livestock's temperature parameters and tolerances. If the power grid is down and the cell towers are overloaded, you will not be able to look up whether your specific species of corridors can tolerate 84-degree water.
Mentioning the buckets with the tight-fitting lids brings up a really interesting preparedness strategy we found in our research regarding pre-staging water. Let's say I'm watching the local news and I see a massive, severe thunderstorm system tracking directly toward my city. I know the power grid in my neighborhood is notoriously fragile. What should I be doing with those buckets before the storm hits?
You should practice short-term storm preparation. A few hours before the severe weather is forecast to hit, you take those clean, dedicated buckets and fill them with the tap water you normally use for water changes.
Okay, just regular tap water.
You treat the water with your conditioner exactly as you normally would. You snap the tight-fitting lids on to protect the water from household dust, pet dander, or stray chemical aerosols, and you stage those buckets right next to the aquarium.
Wait, let me push back on this for a second.
Yeah.
If the power goes out, the filter stops. But does a blackout automatically mean I have to do a massive, stressful water change in the dark? Because I feel like wrestling with heavy buckets while holding a flashlight would just terrify the fish even more.
That is a very important distinction, and you are right to question it. No, a blackout does not automatically mandate an immediate water change. In fact, if the tank parameters remain stable, you shouldn't intervene unnecessarily. You may not need the water, The point is to have options before the lights go out.
You may not need the water. The point is to have options before the lights go out.
Exactly. Consider a scenario where the power is out for 48 hours. Your biological filter has crashed because the bacteria suffocated. You test the water with your liquid kit, and you see that ammonia is suddenly spiking to dangerously lethal levels.
You have to act fast.
Because you pre-staged that water, you now have safe, fully conditioned room temperature water sitting right there ready to go. You don't have to try and perfectly measure out drops of dechlorinator in pitch darkness. You don't have to worry if the municipal water treatment plant experienced a pressure drop or chemical flush during the storm. You have immediate safe optionality.
That is incredible peace of mind. Just knowing the safety net is sitting right there if things go sideways removes so much of the anxiety. Now, before we wrap up, I want to talk about staying ahead of the temperature curve on a daily basis, even when the power is working perfectly fine. We touched on monitoring tech earlier. What should we be looking for to automate some of this anxiety away?
Dedicated temperature controllers are excellent proactive tools that act as an automated safety net. We often highlight devices like the INKBRD controllers on the tank guide, but it is very important to specify that the functionality and features vary highly depending on the exact model you purchase.
Right. They aren't just one-size-fits-all magic boxes.
Not at all. The basic models might simply have an audible alarm that beeps if the water exceeds a certain temperature, but the more advanced models feature Wi-Fi connectivity. They will push a direct alert to a smartphone app while you are sitting in your office at work, letting you know the living room is getting too hot.
That's super convenient.
And the most robust models feature dual relays. This means they monitor a temperature probe, and if the water gets too hot, they automatically cut power to your heater, preventing a stuck thermostat from boiling the tank, and simultaneously send power to a cooling fan to begin the evaporative cooling process. You have to research the specific device to ensure it aligns with your overall preparedness strategy.
Having a small computer text my phone to say, hey, your tank was getting a bit hot, so I turned the fan on for you, sounds like the ultimate luxury in fish keeping. Okay, let's take a breath and unpack everything we've meticulously covered today. If we summarize the most common devastating mistakes we see Jeepers make every single summer. Well, the first one is focusing solely on the red line of the thermometer and completely ignoring the invisible, far more deadly threat of oxygen depletion.
Yes, entirely missing the mechanics of the thermal oxygen squeeze.
The second massive mistake is giving in to panic and attempting to cool the tank too quickly with ice. We steer the temperature down gradually. We never drop an anchor and shock the system. The third is panic-feeding stressed, lethargic fish out of a misplaced sense of comfort, which only skyrockets their oxygen demand and pollutes the water. The fourth is looking at a gasping fish and assuming it must be the heat without ever testing the water for the silent killer of ammonia.
The invisible killer.
Right. And the final mistake is waiting until the house is completely dark and the power grid is dead to start wondering if you own a battery-powered air pump.
Every single one of those mistakes stems from a posture of reaction rather than a posture of preparation. Which brings us perfectly back to the core message, the blueprint we laid out at the very beginning of this discussion.
Monitor the tank. Protect oxygenation. Test the water. Make gradual changes. Prepare before the outage. Because a heat emergency is a system problem, not just a thermometer problem.
It is entirely systemic, and I think if we connect everything we've discussed today to the bigger picture of the hobby, there's a fundamental shift in perspective that makes all of this complex husbandry so much easier to manage. I want you to look at your aquarium not as a static glass box of water that you mechanically dominate and control. I want you to view it as a singular, living, breathing entity that inhales and exhales.
Wow, a breathing entity.
The surface of that water is its literal lung. The beneficial bacteria in the filter are its internal organs. When the immense suffocating pressure of summer heat presses down on that fragile ecosystem, your primary job is not to aggressively fight the weather. Your job is simply to help the tank breathe.
Your job is simply to help the tank breathe. I absolutely love that. It completely changes how you look at the responsibility of the hobby. Well, that is all the time we have for today's deep dive. If you want to explore the specific mechanics of these topics further, you can check out the Daily Tank Journal read through our comprehensive summer aquarium heat article on the Tank Guide, or head over to the Fish Keeping Life Car Etsy store for more detailed resources and guides. We want to thank you so much for hanging out with us, for digging into the science with us, and for taking such incredibly good care of your aquatic ecosystems. Stay cool, stay prepared, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.